So first, we all know what a vulnerability is. So a vulnerability in a system could be a design flaw, an implementation flaw, a deployment flaw, or a configuration flaw. So over the internet, there are a lot of systems that are vulnerable, and even when there is a software vulnerability, a patch is issued, and this patch remains unapplied for a really long time. So there's always this long tail of vulnerable devices that are available on the internet, and of course the big question is, why aren't these devices being patched, even though a patch is issued? Now, back in the days, it used to be the case that a compromised system only affected the owner of that system, but this is no longer the case, right? So right now, there are multiple reasons why a compromised system affects a lot of other people beyond the owner. And one of these is that attackers learn from compromised systems. So for example, a password leak tells the attacker a lot about the behavior of users choosing those passwords. In a lot of cases, the websites have a lot of information about the users, and so a leak or a compromised system also kind of leaks another dimension about the user, which advances illicit user profiling activities and this kind of thing. A compromised system can also be used to mount denial of service attacks and cause damage to other systems. And so it's no longer the case that when a system is compromised, we can turn a blind eye and say this is just the damage, right? So it affects everyone. All right, so I want to focus on the related work in this story because it's very important and it's part of the story. So over the last 11 years or so, there has been a lot of research papers on vulnerability notifications. So the question was, is notification the problem? Like, is the problem that admins do not know about the existence of their vulnerability? And this has started with papers as early as 2014, where authors tried to notify servers about the existence of Heartbleed, but this has led to no significant improvement to remediation rates, so about 13% remediation. A lot of these papers had a control group where the authors compared the remediation rates of the websites that were notified with the ones that weren't, so that they can decisively know if the notification has made the improvement. 2 years later, there was another paper which has tested multiple notification strategies, so emails that are verbose versus non-verbose, the language of the email, this kind of thing. Again, remediation rates were very, very low, about 15 to 18%. Another paper tested notifying websites with cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, again, low remediation rates. Another tested notifying websites with vulnerable cipher suites or obsoleted TLS versions, again, very low remediation rates. Okay. So another line of research is testing the factors that affect notification success. And some of the factors that are tested were, for example, ensure that the email reaches the proper person. This is an important one, but ensuring this factor is not enough to increase remediation rates. Some have tested the sender's reputation. So if you receive a notification from a reputable sender versus a non-reputable sender, whether this is important. Some conflicting results there. So some papers found that it is important, others found that it isn't. The notification method itself, so whether you send an email or nudge them on social networks or even send them a snail mail, again, various results there. And finally, providing a proof of concept of the vulnerability to kind of highlight how important it is to patch this vulnerability. Success varied, but nothing that's very significant. Another line of research is notification of already compromised systems, in contrast to just vulnerable systems, right? So showing that your website is actively distributing malware or it is engaging in this behavior that way. Now, this, on that front, some papers had more success than others. So we can see 50% remediation rates, whereas others, again, 10%, 17% remediation rates. So not super high, but a little higher than in the previous papers. And finally, there was one paper in 2014 which has gone beyond notification, and the authors really engaged actively with the system that was compromised, and they tried to demonstrate how to patch and highlighted the damage that could happen if the system wasn't patched, and they engaged with other industry players, which the vulnerable system was using their equipment, like Cisco, for example. So this was really very active engagement beyond just notifying them, and here the success rate was relatively higher again than previous papers. So the overall takeaway of this research is that there's clearly something beyond just notifying authors, and the assumption that has been running all along in those papers, which is that the issue is that the admins do not know about the existence of the vulnerability, is really questionable, right? It must not be the case that the lack of knowledge is the issue here. So in this research, we decided to directly solicit the admins' own opinions about what they think are the important factors that stop them from remediating or patching software. And so we designed this study in which we tried to recruit participants who are admins into participating in our survey to ask them and solicit their opinion. It's worth mentioning that some of the papers that I've covered do have a survey in the end after they notify about the vulnerability, but most of these surveys were geared towards getting feedback on this study methodology itself. How do you think we could improve, or this kind of thing, rather than actually asking the admins about what they think are the factors that are important for remediating vulnerabilities. So on that front, we have two research questions. The first is, what do admins think are the important factors that impede or advance remediation of vulnerabilities? And the second is how such factors change with things like the organizational size, the team size, the severity of the vulnerability, and so on. So in terms of participant recruitment, we wanted to reach out to admins who specifically have vulnerable systems, and so we needed to find those systems first. And I guess in retrospect, getting the inputs of admins whom do not have vulnerable system is also important. But I think in this initial stage of the study, we really wanted to ask the admins who continue to have a vulnerability even after a patch was issued, just to know why. From those admins, why haven't the vulnerability been patched? So we randomly chose 9 vulnerabilities from the past 8 years. This table here shows the vulnerabilities that we chose. So the table also shows the severity level of these vulnerabilities. So they varied from low to medium severity to high or critical severity. Now, for each vulnerability, we used census to try and find vulnerable devices. So we simply searched on census for a specific software version that we know is vulnerable. And so again, the table here shows the number of devices that we found on census having these vulnerabilities. And then we used the regional internet registry's WHOIS database to find the emails of those devices. So finally, we removed unique emails because in a lot of cases, we found that the same email address was used across multiple devices. So of course, we didn't want to send the same survey to the same email address multiple times. And so we got rid of repeated emails and we used unique email addresses. One final note about the study methodology, which is that we did not test using another census search if the vulnerability was actually remediated, because we were not interested to see the effectiveness of like our notification strategy or any of that. We just wanted to get the opinion of the participants, the admins. So if they filled our survey, we're happy. So we took, so there are some ethical considerations here, of course. So we made sure that admins understand that participation is voluntary. We kept an opt-out list with an option to allow admins to opt out from the study. We were transparent about our activities, so we set up a device with a website that explains who we are, what we are doing, and this was hosted on the same server with the same IP address that we ran our measurements, send the emails from. And we limited the emails that were being sent to just one email. Even if the same email address appeared in multiple vulnerabilities, we kept track of all the addresses that we've sent emails to so that we don't send them emails again. All right, so this is finally the table with the number of participants. And you can see here on the far right that the number of participants wasn't really equally distributed across all the vulnerabilities. So some vulnerabilities had very few participants, whereas others had many. This doesn't really allow us to do a lot of statistical significant analysis, but we can at least look at the whole data set combined. All right, before I proceed with the results, we also did an IP geolocation lookup to the places of those participants just to see where those organizations are. And the table here shows the results. You can see that most of our participants are in the US and Canada. A few others are from Europe and then from other places as well. Okay. All right, so we used the qualitative and quantitative analysis. So quantitative analysis for the survey responses, and qualitative analysis just to analyze the open-ended question that we had in the survey, asking admins to provide any further information that we haven't thought of, or the text that we got as a response to our emails from the admins. We used thematic analysis and open coding techniques to try and see if there are themes that emerge from the open-ended questions, and we analyzed those as well. All right, so in this talk, I've selected a few questions from the survey, which I'm going to focus on, but of course, you're welcome to read the paper for all the questions. So those questions that you see on this slide are demographic questions. So what is the size of your organization? How many people are involved in your team, and so on. So this table here shows the result. Okay, so data is more or less split between small to medium enterprises and large enterprises, and the number of admins on the team. This varied as well. So we had a lot of people that say it's just me and the team, whereas we had a few others that said the team size was between 2 and 10, and very few had more than 10 people. Rest of the survey questions. So we asked questions such as, were you previously aware of this vulnerability before you received our email? Have you already remediated this vulnerability? And if not, do you plan to remediate the vulnerability? So these were the results. So again, the results were split. So about half the people said that they are aware. Another half said they aren't. Some said that they have remediated. Others said that they haven't. And some said that they are planning to, but others didn't. Now, looking at this on its own, it doesn't give us a lot of information because we don't really know, who of those that were aware decided to remediate after and who didn't, and so on, right? So we wanted to cut down this data further so that we can see the percentage of those that decided to remediate when they were aware, and those that decided not to when they were aware, and same thing for those who weren't aware of the vulnerability. Now, there are multiple things to notice here. So the partition of the people that were not aware and who decided to remediate. So those decided to remediate after they received our notification, right? So a lot of those have remediated, and then they filled our survey. And when they filled our survey, they answered that they have remediated, and that's why they have remediated the vulnerability, even though they were not aware. Now you can see that at the top portion as well. So we have here people that are aware of the vulnerability, and they say that it has. They say that it has been remediated. Sorry, I keep looking here because I can't really see the text on that screen. It's a little bit far away. So some of those say that, yeah, that's better, thanks. So some of those say that the ones that say that they have remediated and they were aware, they say that some of those are false positives. And this is an artifact of our methodology, right? So we used census, and because of backporting activity in software updates. When software is being updated and it gets the same version number, we can't really tell if that software is patched or not, because we see the version number and then, we think that this is vulnerable, but it's not. And so in that case, there were a few false positives, and these were pointed out by the survey, by the admins that we have surveyed. So they said that in this case, some of those were for false positives. There were some false positives as well in those that did not remediate, but they said that they're not planning to. And some others who again answered that they do not plan to said that the server is set up as a honeypot, and they know and they are aware that the vulnerability existed, but it's set up exactly for that reason. They don't want to update it. Now, others who were not aware of the vulnerability, they are not going to remediate it. Some of those said that the server is very old, so no one cares about it. Others said that the decommissioning of this server is planned, and we had one participant who said something along the lines of this server is not going to be fixed because no one cares about it, something like that. Okay, but these should give us a lot of insights about, again, the existence or an explanation to the reason why a lot of these systems that we see keep being vulnerable, and they remain being connected to the internet and they're not being fixed. Now, analyzing this past result, we find that there's no statistically significant association between awareness of the vulnerability and the plans to remediate the vulnerability. So then we asked the admins about what they think are the most important factors. So this was part of the survey. I'm not going to read this, but you can see here that the admins have rated on a 5-point Likert scale the importance from very important to very not important of some 8 to 9 factors that we presented. And the top 2 most important factors are third-party dependencies and compatibility issues. And you can see as the 6th or the 7th factor, awareness of the vulnerability, right? Which again, from the admin's perspective, highlights the fact that the awareness or unawareness of the vulnerability is not really the top factor that decides whether the vulnerability will be patched. Now, we did find statistically significant difference on the importance of in the importance of different factors among participants. And one of the most important results is that the limited knowledge of the remediation process was significantly less important than compatibility issues, which again gives more weight to compatibility issues as being one of the most important factors. I think this is probably the most important result in this paper, which really helps understand a lot of the open questions in past research. We did further analysis, and again, I'm just taking snapshots from the paper here. So we divided participants into 2 groups, those who remediated and those who didn't. We find that there are statistical significant difference between the factors between those 2 groups, but there wasn't enough data to tell us, again, within the groups, which factor was most important. So this maybe is something that suggests we need to run this study again at a higher scale to collect more data. Now to the, still in the quantitative analysis, so we have looked at other factors such as awareness, remediation, and remediation plans in relation to the organizational size, vulnerability severity, and size of the remediation team. Some of these factors mattered, like, for example, the organizational size. Large enterprises were more likely to be aware of the existence of a vulnerability, more so than small to medium enterprises. Vulnerability severity, we found that low to medium severity is less likely to be remediated compared to high and critical severity. And the size of the admin team did matter in one of the factors that has to do with like collaboration requirements between the participants. Okay. Next is the qualitative analysis. So after doing the thematic analysis, we have identified 6 themes from the open-ended question. So participants have wrote down things that can be grouped into themes of lack of control over the vulnerable systems, things like politics, benefits do not outweigh the cost. So under each one of those, I have an example here. Maybe I don't have a lot of time here, but Lack of control over the vulnerable systems. One participant said that they do not control this system, but they work for an ISP, and so they can send a warning to the owner of that device saying that their device is vulnerable, and if it happens to continue to be vulnerable with this vulnerability, it's going to be like quarantined or something. Politics, we had a few participants who have identified this as one of the major points. So they said either the company doesn't care about fixing the vulnerability, or other organizations that they collaborate with, the business model doesn't involve fixing vulnerabilities. Okay. Benefits do not outweigh the cost. Same thing. Limited resources, so lack of enough people on the team, or lack of financial resources to fix vulnerabilities or to update systems. We also had complex remediation process and the existence of legacy systems, right? So these are the 6 main themes that we saw in our data. So the conclusion is that we didn't find one solution that we can say is the panacea for fixing all the issues, or a factor that if we target, we can really get rid of the long tail of devices that remain vulnerable on the internet, right? So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. But we also didn't find evidence that awareness of the existence of a vulnerability affects remediation plans, which, as I said, perhaps is the most thing that demystifies results in previous literature. We found a bunch of other factors, which are all also listed in the paper, but compatibility issues is the highest, is probably the highest thing that has emerged from this research. So compatibility and legacy, backwards compatibility, and making sure to accommodate legacy devices is probably the most prominent factor that is largely agreed upon across all the participants that we have surveyed in this study. All right, so, and finally, the other factors that affect remediation plans are the factors that emerged from the thematic analysis. So things like, again, politics, lack of resources, and so on. Okay, so this is it for my talk. Thank you.
It seems like your survey was mostly focused on web systems or web-based vulnerabilities, if I remember correctly. Is that the case?
Well, there were some SSH-related vulnerabilities. So it's not web, but mostly the focus is on software vulnerabilities, software that needs to be patched, rather than other like deployment and configuration vulnerabilities.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to get to is SSH, I guess, is more versatile. It is not just used in web-based systems, but also, for example, in industrial control systems. So I wonder if in your survey you have looked at not just the software vulnerability, but the nature of the device on which the vulnerability exists. For example, if it was a web server, I think it's a different dynamic in terms of patching it versus an industrial control system, which is SSH, but SSH on a web server is a different ballgame as compared to SSH.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We didn't actually, and I think this is a good point to maybe look into any future expressions. Yeah, we haven't.
Very interesting study. I really like your results. One thing that occurred to me is that, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but a lot of the people in that split away graph ended up in a plan to remediate, actually, but not actually have it remediated, even if they were aware. Do you have any sense for, first, how long the remediation delay is in those cases, and second, like what factors might influence that, or is that not part of something?
Yeah, so I understand this is an intriguing point and a curious question, and I think I've been like, when we had done the study, I kept nagging Tamara, the student, to try and follow up, and because I really wanted to see those who said that they didn't remediate or plan to remediate, they actually followed through, or was it just that? And so we didn't have that, or we didn't follow up with this study. So I have no clue whether those who said that they planned to actually remediate it. But then again, thinking from the perspective of the objective of our study, we just wanted to have it, having this field survey to tell us what they think are the important factors. Some of them probably ended up actually remediating, some of them probably didn't. We could, in retrospect, go back to census and test that, but we haven't.
Were these vulnerabilities very old? in terms of a year old or something like that?
So some of them, so the oldest was in 2014. Heartbeat was one of our vulnerabilities.
Okay.
We had TLS SSL Poodle was one of our vulnerabilities. This is as old as it gets, like 2014. And then the newest was, I think,